according to the note here, he is a theatre and opera director and festival director. He's festival director of the Cork Midsummer Festival. He studied English and philosophy at UCC. To say studied is probably a bit exaggerated. You were there, yes. And was heavily involved with Dramatics and Granary Theatre. So if the first one is an exaggeration, the second one is a supreme understatement, because he, I think, probably ran the Dramatics, as far as I remember, almost single-handedly, and lived in the Granary Theatre. We were going to start charging him rent eventually, because he was in the Granary Theatre morning, noon and night, continuing and developing a fabulous tradition of people who learn by doing, associated with the Granary Theatre. People like Fiona Shaw and John Crowley and so on. And his absolute manic devotion to theatre and to making theatre and to being part of the theatre scene gave rise to a somewhat meteoric career. Let's hope, unlike most meteors, that it lasts a long time. So he moved on very quickly, became an associate director at Rough Magic Theatre, dance curator at Kilkenny Arts Festival, joint artistic director of Playgroup, which he co-founded after leaving UCC. Recent productions as a director include Shibari at the Abbey Theatre, Dublin Theatre Festival, and the Gate Theatre's acclaimed production of Beckett's What, with leading Beckett interpreter Barry McGovern. And that is now touring. It's still touring, is it, on the tour in the States?
It's not touring at the moment, but it's likely to come out of that.
It's, yeah. So that's another production which is an ongoing life. And as he was just telling me, when he isn't in Norway taking off his clothes and exchanging them with a dancer on the stage in front of an appreciative audience, he is here talking to us. So I'd like to welcome Tom.
Hi. I've written something which is kind of uncharacteristic for me. I usually make it up, or try and appear like I've made it up. And I suppose this was just an attempt for me to try and put some of my thoughts about festivals and how I arrived at making festivals, and the festival that I'm making here at the moment. So some thoughts about that, and there are some lists in it, which I'll read, which I couldn't remember. And it introduces itself sort of, I think, I know most of the people here in the room, and the introduction assumes that I don't know most of the people here in the room. So you can maybe pretend that you're someone who knows me slightly better than you do, if you do. Hi. Here we all are together. I'm Tom. I direct theatre, opera and music theatre. I grew up in Cork. I studied English and philosophy at UCC, with the caveats that Jerry's laid out, and was heavily involved in the Granary and Dramatic while I was there. Since 2011, I've been Festival Director of Cork Midsummer Festival. Cork Midsummer Festival is a multidisciplinary summer arts festival which runs for 10 days in June. It presents Irish and international theatre, dance, music, opera, visual arts, outdoor arts, and a programme of work for children and families. A list. This past summer's festival as a series of ingredients. A 28-year-old Blarney boy, a living portrait of Cork, one mythical girl from the slums, one deep house junkie, one best man, two Alices, a transfer of power, a goodbye party for a city, the tallest man in the world, a journey in hope, a reimagining of a Greek tale, a new experience of togetherness, a story of magic and beauty, one scarlet letter, many secrets of the city, one half of two parts, one exit strategy, one gamelan and a string sextet, one world-class vocal group, 7 prayer times, one ghostly realm, 49 bells, 2 industrial music legends, 11 female photographers, a group of pioneering cubists, 3 German artists, 8 printmakers. I never thought I'd become a festival director. Initially I thought I would be an actor, but it became very quickly that that was not going to be the case. I started directing while at UCC and discovered that that was something that I wanted to pursue in the long term. Growing up in Cork, I felt the need to expose myself to more than what was on offer in the city. I needed to imagine myself and the work I was doing in a broader context than my immediate surroundings. I wanted to stay and work in Cork, but I didn't want to be limited by it. As a student, festivals were a way of seeing a lot of work at the same time, of finding out what was going on out there, of having my presumptions questioned, of having my mind blown. The Dublin Fringe and Dublin Theatre Festival were closest to home, and every autumn I bought the cheapest train ticket I could and crashed on people's carpets while saving every penny I could to see everything I could. I saw shows in foreign languages for the first time. I struggled to make sense of work by major artists who I've gone back to again and again. And I saw first productions by people who have gone on to be close friends and collaborators. I discovered that the festival club was filled with like-minded souls who stayed up late and talked about the work that they'd seen. That a festival was what happened on the stage, but also what happened around the stage, in the spaces that opened up around the productions and the conversations that took place between the performances, that made a festival more than the sum of its individual parts. At the time, I spent a lot of my time at the Granary Theatre, a crucible where a whole generation of Cork theatre makers were given space to run amok, to be brave, to fall on their faces and to dream. Every summer, the theatre supported a student production to go to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and so for 3 summers during and after college, I was able to take the long bus and ferry journey to Scotland. This was before Ryanair. Sleep in a corner of a dodgy flat and spend a month seeing new writing that moved and provoked me, terrible productions in leaky basements that are best forgotten, and major international productions from far away in the cheap seats that utterly changed what I thought the theatre was and could be. As I said before, I never thought I'd become a festival director. Just after I left college, the then director of the Granary moved to become director of Cork Midsummer Festival, and he invited a whole generation of artists who had started with him at the Granary to make productions at the festival. We had no money, but we had big ideas, and as we weren't able to afford to pay anyone, there were actually no limits to what we could try to do. We'd grown up seeing Kirkcudbracker's iconic productions of Disco Pigs, Phaedra's Love, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. And the idea of working on a large scale and involving performers from the community was a huge influence. I set up a company, Playgroup, and we made a live soap opera which unfolded over 10 days and was so gripping that people got hooked and came back every day to see what would happen. We used the entire Everyman Theatre building and 50 actors to tell the story of the theatre's past as a music hall. And we brought audiences on the train to Cove, with groups of singers, musicians, and wife-swapping swingers getting on at the various suburban stations along the way. With these projects, we were using the shape of the festival, the landscape of the city, and the hidden histories of the city's buildings to make productions that were specifically for the festival and probably couldn't have happened in any other context. I moved to Dublin in 2006 to become Associate Director of Rough Magic Theatre Company, having been training on their Seeds Artist Development Programme while making the work in Cork that I've just mentioned. Come in. Hi. In that capacity, I'm talking about my work that I was doing in 2006 at Rough Magic. I directed a number of contemporary international plays, drawing on my growing interest in what was going on in the theatre beyond these shores, and also coordinating the Seeds programme, providing opportunities for new artists to develop and discover as I had done. Without realising it, this double focus on international work and emerging artists was crucial training for my work as a festival curator and director to come. In 2008, I was invited to curate the theatre and dance programme at Kilkenny Arts Festival. That festival had changed their structure. And instead of having a single artistic director who selected the entire programme, they had a team of individual curators, each responsible for a different art form. I was a little afraid of the audience in Kilkenny. Hi. I'm talking about a book I was doing in 2008.
His performance completely.
I was a little afraid of the audience in Kilkenny. They seemed quite conservative and more interested in literature and music. How to make a theatre programme that worked for them? I started by trying to programme shows that I thought would appeal to this audience. How about New York experimental legends, Mabel Mines, with a piece about James Joyce? Or the great director Peter Brook staging Shakespeare's sonnets. Guess what? The audience went to see the music and literature program and mostly stayed away from the theatre. When Peter Brook stood in the theatre and wondered where the audience were, we knew we needed a change. I proposed that rather than try to increase our ticket sales, we would reduce them. Rather than trying to program for the audiences who were more interested in music and literature, we'd try and find an audience who was slipping through the cracks, who were curious and contemporary and wanted something new from their festival experience. We decided not to use the main stage of the local theatre at all, but rather programmed in small rooms and even bars around the city. None of the shows were in spaces with room for more than 100 people. Some of the shows were for one person at a time. We presented no drama in 2008, or 2010, I should say, I made a typo there. But rather a series of works which put real lives on stage and happened in and around the audience and encouraged them to participate. The effect was exciting. Suddenly there was a new audience at the festival. Where had they come from? Everything was sold out. People I didn't know would cross the street in the middle of the day to tell me about the experiences that they'd had. It wasn't about giving people what we thought they wanted. It was about giving them what they needed that nobody had given them before. When the job came up at Cork Midsummer Festival, I decided not to apply. I didn't want to stop directing. And more importantly, I didn't want to move back to Cork. I had moved back at the beginning of 2006 to take up other opportunities elsewhere. I had the feeling that I had exhausted all the possibilities that Cork had to offer at that moment. But there was something starting to happen in Cork at the beginning of 2011. It seemed that there was a new generation of artists starting to emerge in the city, and that people were staying rather than moving away. There were new directors at many of the city's key arts organisations. I could sense there was potential in the air. I thought that through the process of making these festivals, I might even be able to try to answer some of the questions about why I moved away. Another list. All the festivals I've been to since the summer of 2011. And some of these I've been to more than once. Cork Midsummer Festival, Zürcher Festspiele, Impulse Festival, Les Tombées de la Nuit, Manchester International Festival, Galway Arts Festival, Kinsale Arts Festival, The Reich Effect, Kilkenny Arts Festival, Edinburgh Festival Fringe, Edinburgh International Festival, Dublin Fringe Festival, Dublin Theatre Festival, Wexford Festival Opera, Cork Film Festival, Big Bang, Under the Radar, Coil, American Realness, Push Festival, Adelaide Festival, Adelaide Fringe Festival, Perth Festival, Fierce Festival, Donau Festival, Kunsten Festival des Arts, Dublin Dance Festival, Brighton Festival, Festival Trans-Amérique, Operadag in Rotterdam, Malta Festival, Festival d'Avignon, Documenta 13, IETM Zagreb, Perforations Festival, Prototype Festival, London International Mime Festival, In Between Time, Via Festival, IETM Dublin, Live Collision, Home Festival, Holland Festival, Gaze Film Festival, IETM Athens, Meteor Festival. The challenge with taking on a festival like Cork Midsummer Festival, which had been around for 16 years when I had started, was how to maintain what was strong and unique about it, while at the same time refreshing it for the present and making something new for the future. The idea of having a festival at midsummer to mark this transitional part of the year has been around for a lot longer than any of us, and the ideas of gathering, regeneration, community and transformation that are involved in this kind of celebration feel more important than they've ever done. I'd like to think that a festival which engages with its audience, its artists and its context with a sense of openness and generosity and adventure is what we need right now. Historically, a festival was a sanctioned period of lawlessness, where people were encouraged to live their lives in a different way, and I like to think that a festival today should give the public that same kind of permission. With a big summer festival like this, there are many stakeholders with many different needs and desires for the festival. There is the tourism sector, who needs the festival to be popular and to attract visitors from outside the city. There is the mainstream local audience, whose main opportunity to see contemporary theatre and dance happens during the festival, but who might not be so adventurous in going to see something unfamiliar. There are funders who have various priorities that need to be achieved. There are local partner organisations who are excited by the additional profile and the opportunity to present something more challenging that the festival brings. There are people in the city who have never heard of the festival or thought about being involved in it. And there are the artists, particularly local artists and emerging artists, who need the support and exposure that the festival can bring. I found it extremely valuable to visit a large number of Irish and international festivals, not only to discover productions and artists that I could invite, but also to get a sense of how these festivals engage with the place in which they have them, how they take on the particular characteristics of the place and the people who live there, and how they think about their audience or audiences. There are festivals like Perth Festival in Australia who attract 300,000 people and take $5 million at the box office. Or a festival like In Between Time in Bristol, which presents a beautifully small and thoughtfully curated programme where no more than 200 people experience the entire programme over one weekend. There is something exhilarating about being at a festival which really takes over a city and is completely unavoidable. But there's also something really thrilling about being at something which feels intimate and special and being put on especially for you. An art form specific festival, particularly in something like music or literature, can attract an extremely loyal audience who go to see literally everything in the programme. Whereas a multidisciplinary festival has broader appeal, but requires the organisers to work much harder to attract different audiences. In trying to imagine what the festival of the future might be, and how Cork Midsummer Festival might take a step in that direction, I found that the crucial thing is to think deeply about the context in which the festival takes place. This context is many things. It's the place, the venues, the artists, the social and cultural history, what's going on right now, and what might happen in the future. I'm going to give a few examples of how we've thought about context in the work that we've done at the festival. When I started at the festival, the 2011 edition was already underway. A few weeks later, I went to Zurich to experience a project I had heard about by artists I admired. Ciudades Paralelas, Parallel Cities, was a series of site-specific performances curated by the Swiss theatre director Stefan Kegi and the Argentinian director Lola Arias. These 8 performances were created by some of the most significant contemporary artists working in performance. They took place in generic locations that could be found in any city: a hotel, house, library, courthouse, rooftop, station, factory, and shopping centre. Everything okay over there?
Yeah, thanks.
And they were documentary theatre in that they featured non-professional performers presenting non-fictional material. I'd never been to Zurich, and I spent 12 hours getting a unique backstage tour of the city. I came as a tourist of sorts, but didn't visit any cathedrals or museums or parks, but rather took a bus to a crisp factory outside the city, stood outside an apartment block and eavesdropped on the inhabitants, and watched local writers imagine a live narration for the people passing them by in a train station. I knew this would be amazing in Cork, as a way of giving visitors the kind of experience I had had, and of showing the city to its inhabitants in a new way. Less than 1 year later, we had raised significant funding from a range of corporate partners and international funding bodies, and assembled a team of over 150 people to bring these performances to life. We brought audiences onto the roof of City Hall. We visited the Barry's Tea Factory to discover the lives of the people who worked there. And unbeknownst to the management, we smuggled audiences into Manton Point Shopping Centre, who followed instructions through headsets and walked, ran and danced through the shopping centre to the bemusement of the other customers. This was an opportunity to unlock the city as a site for performance, to subvert people's expectations of what performance might be and where it might take place, involve people who would never have otherwise engaged with the festival, and introduce artists here to new ways of working. Bernard Ferdassier, former director of France's legendary Avignon Festival, has said that the true role of a festival is to help artists to dare to engage in new projects. And for me that is crucial, and equally important is to help find an audience for that work. I know all too well the impact that a festival like Cork Midsummer Festival can have for emerging artists. I'm part of that story of the festival myself. And one of the things I'm most proud of from this year's festival was a new programme strand called We Live Here, which provided a platform for a new generation of artists who were committed to living and working in Cork. Across the festival, Cork-based artists working in theatre, dance, music, circus and live art, including some people here in the room, had the opportunity to make some of their most ambitious work to date and to show it to a wide audience. Cork felt creative and innovative and alive during the festival, and it was in a huge part thanks to these daring young artists who we are delighted to support. We're hoping that We Live Here can return again as part of next year's festival to enable us to continue to work with some of these exciting collaborators and to discover new artists to work with, to support and to bring their work to the attention of the public. Making a festival like this is harder than ever, and we're grateful to everyone who supports us financially as well as with their creativity, their time and their enthusiasm. The cuts that have just been announced in the recent budget will make it even harder to do what we do, but we're dreaming on, and we're working hard to make the city a more thoughtful, surprising and creative place to visit or to live in. A final list to conclude. Some festival experiences I've had. I've been tied up and blindfolded in a wheelchair. I've exchanged my clothes with a dancer on stage in front of an audience. That was yesterday. I've watched a 6-hour production of a Greek tragedy that started at midnight and ended with breakfast at dawn. I've seen an opera set in a prison, performed in a prison. I've seen a show where all of the dancers were wearing a mask of my face. I've danced at a silent disco in an old town square. I've walked through a city I know holding hands with a drag queen. I've been given a bath in a hotel room. I've been brought onto a rooftop by a blind musician in the dead of night. I've fallen asleep during shows. I've had international festival directors fall asleep sitting next to me at a show I directed. I've been photographed naked with 2,000 other people. I've had a vodka drinking competition with a performer in a hotel room watched by an audience on television in the hotel bar. I've eaten dinner with primary school children. I've been walked blindfold around a city for 3 hours. I've heard a string quartet play music that was only ever intended to be played by machines. I watched the sunrise at a dance performance in the middle of Cork City. I've got lost in strange cities, looking for venues in places I would never have seen otherwise. I've seen theatre made by visual artists, and opera made by theatre artists, and visual art made by singers, and performances where I can't quite work out what to call it. I've laughed a lot, I've cried a lot, I've thought a lot, I've screamed, please be over and over in my head a lot. I've seen the next big thing, I've seen what used to be the next big thing. I've given up looking for the next big thing. I've watched, I've listened, I've been there, that's all.
That's a performance completely. Wow.
So she asked me to moderate questions, so I'm not sure what that means. Intercepting them as they flow through the air and passing them to yours.
Maybe asking a few while people build
Maybe
up.
asking you.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is, in kind of 2 years of Perforum, first time I said Perforum as a performance, which originally was a brief of Perforum.
Okay.
That a performance is not just academic talk, it's a performance. And so, it's fantastic. I don't have a question, it's just like, yeah, I have a question. I mean, you wrote this.
Yeah.
Yeah. For this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose it was. So I'm not an academic, and I read academic writing. I have a degree, just about. But I suppose I was conscious that I was coming here as a practitioner, and I suppose I'm also not that I'm trying to be a performer, but I'm interested in this kind of simplicity in performance at the moment. There's something about and there's something about the lecture as a kind of performative gesture, which I guess I'm interested in. So I thought I would just put some thoughts together, and I think it's something that you could read also, and it would be like a thing. But I guess it was also in a way the first time that I've put some of those thoughts together in one place, and I was making lists just to put my thoughts in order, and then I thought, like, all I do is make lists.
It's great. I mean, I think you can develop it as a solo performance. It's the life and death of a festival director.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Just the death part.
Hopefully not the death too soon.
It's like Marina Abramovic and the life and death of Marina Abramovic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. Thank you very much, sir. Really enjoyed
Thank
it.
you for the invitation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, great performance. But beyond that, I'm really interested in your thoughts as a festival director. I mean, from year to year, how do you work? How do you make the program? Is there a theme that you're trying to put together? Or because, as you said, it's a multi-artistic festival, the fact that you have one idea more for the theatre people, more for the music people, more for the dance people, and in creating the program every year, is it that? Are you following one idea or three different ideas, or are you very much influenced by the zeitgeist or by what you've seen around you?
It's a combination of things.
Okay.
I generally don't set out with these festivals here. I don't set out with a theme. That's not to say that I wouldn't approach programming a festival in that way. And in a way that's easier, because if you see a lot of work, as soon as you decide to make a festival on a theme, the program selects itself. But I suppose for me, it's I suppose I like to think of a festival program as a constellation of things, so that it's things which are discrete, but also things that kind of sit together in various different ways. And you put some of it, you explain some of that, but you also let some of that to be there for people to discover. So, in terms of the festival that we've just done, I was conscious that it was the European Year of the Citizen, and that Ireland had the presidency of the European Union and that the festival would take place in the last 10 days of that period. So I was thinking about that. It was something I was thinking about, and how we might look at the citizen and ideas around citizenship. And that led directly to a project called 100% Cork that we did, where we put 100 non-professional performers from Cork, including at least one person in the room, on the stage. So that certainly came out of thinking, that those were things that were going on in the world. But similarly, there's a need to respond to what artists in the city are making. So the We Live Here program was done with an open call, so that was something that we put out there. Something that always, in terms of thinking about Cork, something that's always there in the back of my mind is that this is really a music town. There's obviously an audience for theatre and dance and film and literature, but it's a music town. The thing you can go and see every night in Cork is music, and this is the town of Fleischmann and O'Riordan, but also community choirs and this opera history and the sound art work that Danny McCarthy and his collaborators are doing. So there's something about that which, it's not that every single piece has to have music in it, but that's something that I have in the back of my mind always, and that comes in and out to various degrees. But opening the festival with Rian by Fabulous Beast in 2012, which was a dance performance with live music by Liam O'Malley, that certainly came out of thinking about that. Yeah. So it's many things, and it's the conversations, and it's there's something about, if you lay down a theme in advance, people tend to read every performance that they see in the light of that theme, and they go, oh yeah, so it's about technology, okay, great. But it's sort of like, maybe more successful would be for the audience to actually discover that. It's interesting, I was in Bergen in Norway for the last 2 days at a festival called Meteor, which is Bergen's small, it's very beautiful, it's a small city. It doesn't have it has a kind of mainstream theatre audience, but the sort of experimental theatre audience is, certainly as I've experienced, is much smaller than the audience we have here. Obviously Norway is so rich, they don't know what to do with all their money, so they, the programme is very beautifully curated, but there were so many, like even over the shows I saw over 2 days, there were so many synergies and coincidences, and like there were 2 shows that I think they both ended in a puff of smoke. That because they were new works, the artistic directors know that when the program was on the same evening, but that there were 2 works, that ended in a puff of smoke, or there were 2 performances which were performed by bald, middle-aged men, double acts, which were kind of post-traumatic, and then they sat. It was really interesting to see those 2 pieces together, and one of them was very British, and the other one was very Russian, and so and of course you on the one hand you plan more of that than you let on, but on the other hand you also leave more room for coincidence than you let on.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, Tom, you mentioned the issue of the financial problems. How have you worked to overcome and make sure that your program holds on to everything that you needed to hold on to in the light of that? How do you see things progressing in the future?
With difficulty.
Yeah.
It's super tough. The current climate is super tough, and it's not getting any easier. And it's interesting. I came from the IETM meeting in Athens, which if you don't know about IETM, you should. I'll do a quick plug. It's the informal European theatre meeting. It happens twice a year. It's an opportunity for the theatre and dance sectors in Europe to gather. There's a little bit of marketing going on there, but mostly it's an opportunity to be together and to share experience. And this year it was in Athens, who obviously are in a really grave financial situation, and there is now currently all funding, apart from the National Theatre, all state funding for the arts has been abolished. This is not all. And so it was interesting to come in and to attend a 3-day meeting on the theme of tomorrow in that context. But it's certainly something I felt in the last 6 months here. It sort of, I think we were holding on for things to be getting better around now. And I know certainly this time last year I was out, I was meeting my politicians, I was writing emails, I was full of hope, I was making plans. And I think everyone looks and feels a bit black and blue now. We've held on with the prospect that all of this pain and suffering will be worth it. And we now know that there's going to be at least another year about this. And it's certainly at a Theatre Forum meeting in Dublin, I felt a sense of that the community was just deflating a little bit. And I think the way that we're going to get through it is together. That's what we're going to have to do. And to think about those resources that we have, which are not financial. But it's very tough, and even this year we made the festival probably with a third less, like with 2/3 of the budget that we had the previous year. And for those reasons, the confirmation of the program gets pushed later and later, because you're trying to raise money right up to as late as possible, which means you have less time to sell tickets, you have less time to get the word out. It means you're cancelling things with 2 months to go, and that's the reality of the climate that we're working in now. And in a way, the right answer to your question is we'll be less ambitious. It'll be fine, and we'll be more commercial, and it's but then that's a trade-off against other things, and Cork is is interesting as a festival town, because there are, like, proportionally I think a lot of us, and all the festivals are great, but all of the festivals are looking for funding from the same sources. They're looking for sponsorship from the same sources. They're looking for audiences from the same sources. And the thing you find with audiences this year, even more than before, is people are going to something as an occasion. People are less likely to go out every night of the week. And from a festival point of view, that's interesting. That people are less likely to be out for 10 nights in a row and see 10 things. They'll go out for 3 nights, and then they'll stay in and watch Breaking Bad on DVD for the whole other time. And we're competing with that as well. We're competing with Netflix. We're competing with amazing American television. We're competing with the internet, and the fact that people are people, you need to give them a reason, you know, and just being there isn't enough of a reason anymore. That's sort of an answer.
Yes.
That's a really live thing. Like that's, you know, that's what we're doing, you know, at the moment, and we're looking at what next year will be like, and how much we can plan, how much we have to sit tight, how much next year is about getting through it, what small moments of joy and transformation and progress we can make. You know, is that's what we, you know, what we do, and in a way, it's maybe what we need to look at, you know, now is, you know, to not do what the government is doing, which is like cut all the important stuff, but like actually think about planting seeds, and you know, in terms of the artists that we support, and maybe it's more important that we work with the people who are here than spending a lot of money on bringing people in for the moment. But those are things that we're all thinking about now in a really live way, you know, which is sort of how do we, just what's the future?
Yeah, and it forces you to think more long term anyway.
It does, but also it's really hard to think long term. It's really hard to think beyond the end of your nose these days as well,
Yeah.
because actually you have to get to tomorrow before you can get beyond tomorrow. But that's, you know, it's you know, it's not. And so it's interesting because all of the joy and all of the adventure and all of the creativity is tempered with the things that don't happen, and the things that might not happen, and all of the, you know, and change and new structures, and going back to old structures to find new structures, and all those things. Anyone else? Hi.
Thanks, thanks for this talk. I really do appreciate what you said about dreaming the city and continuing to do that despite maybe other nightmarish scenarios and that interweaving, and I don't know what all can keep that fermenting, but I do think that's really, really crucial, and it's just really lovely to hear it articulated here, and I've enjoyed the festival over the years that I've been in Cork, and you talked a little bit about that connection to place, and then, you know, the last couple of years taking it out of the theatre and exploring the city that way. And I'm wondering what, you know, maybe this is just a small thing, but in terms of the time, say it's midsummer, like is there a significance in that? You know, what's the concentration thing of a festival? You know, that sort of festival overload thing that happens, or you can't afford to go to everything you might want to, or like, is there a way in which that might disperse, say, throughout the year, or?
It's funny because my predecessor we wrestled with that a lot, and I remember in either 2009 or 2010, there was sort of 50 or 60 things in the festival program, and really strong work, but it was competing with itself for audiences and everything at the same time. And I met him on the street, running between venues, trying to see everything. And there was like 12 things on that day, and he sort of he pointed out that if you were to take those 60 events and spread them across the entire year, what an amazing thing that would be. Like, that'd be great. It'd be something fantastic to go and see every week. But you know, it's also there's also something about those periods where you give yourself permission to engage more, you know, and it gives focus to the year. You know, it gives people a kind of a way of structuring their time, and I think, I mean, the midsummer thing, you know, was originally a proposition from the city. Actually, it was a former Lord Mayor, and it was partly to do with the fact that lots of other parts of the year are well served with festivals, and there wasn't really something on at that point. So that's where it emerged, and in a way, then I guess I kind of and of course, you know, Bonfire Night is in that period, and you kind of you know, you take that as a given in a way. And actually, that's not to say that you couldn't move the festival during the time of the year. We talk about that all the time as well. But you know, you kind of post-rationalise the fact that it's at midsummer, and you go, well, what does that mean? And you go, well, there's always been festivals at midsummer, and it is this moment of gathering and transformation and regeneration and togetherness, and I guess, and you know, that's something else that feeds into all of the work. That sort of spirit is sort of and looking at ways of being together. And there's something about the concentration of a festival which I find exciting. And I know in my, in my experience as, someone who makes work and someone who sees a lot of work, sometimes it can become a little bit, it's the second week in May, so we're in Brussels, and that sort of happens. And it's October, so we're at the Dublin Theatre Festival. I'm sorry, I can't do anything else. I'm at the Dublin Theatre Festival. But it's a way of, it's also, I get to see a lot more work because of festivals, because I can go to Norway for 2 days and see 5 things, and someone can come here, and and companies here have had. I know Irene, you're here, and have had the experience where, a presenter from the UK came to see a bunch of things that didn't include Eat My Noises Mighty. They saw Eat My Noises Mighty and invited that show to their festival. So that there's something about, in terms of, often in terms of creating opportunities for artists' exposure, the reason you come to the festival is almost never the thing you take away as well. It's like, so that similarly in Dublin, people come to see the new show by Roberta Page, and then they end up inviting broken tourists all over the world. It's sort of, so that there's something about creating that opportunity for artists. And it's been talked about in this room a number of times where it's so difficult to get people to come to Cork. Why? It shouldn't be. It's lovely, and you have great food, and the beer is really good, and it's better than the beer in Dublin, and it's not far away from anywhere. If there's more than one thing on at a time, then more people can benefit from that. The visitors can have a bigger experience. It does mean that there is a drain on. It means that there isn't enough work being produced and presented in Cork for there to be something fantastic on every week. There is something interesting on every week. But in terms of, say, if you're interested in contemporary theatre and dance, there isn't something on every week. So you trade those things off, and the festival gets a big grant from Fall to Ireland, which we wouldn't get if we weren't presenting a festival, and things like that. So, and then you do, but are we doing that just so we can get the grant from Fall to Ireland, which isn't enough money anyway? That all the time we spent working on that grant, what if we actually went out and did a real job for that a massive amount of period of time? Would we actually earn more money? If we temped out the office staff instead of working on grant applications to actually work in the job? We're talking about this today. But that's again, it's sort of it's some thoughts about that. Did I avoid anything there, or did that make sense to you? Yeah.
Could I ask a question about one of the? I remember years ago doing an article about the Edinburgh Festival, and that particular year there were a couple of statistics lying around. One was that there were 2,000 productions, and the average audience size was 6. And when you put those things together, you suddenly realise Edinburgh wasn't really a festival; it was a trade fair where people tried to sell their wares. Do you feel that pressure to see the Midsummer Festival in Cork, to some extent, as a shop window for Indigenous talent?
Yes. And I think that's partly because I know, I know what that is like. I was there, and and I think it doesn't have to be a trade fair, because actually Edinburgh exists, and Dublin Fringe exists, and you're not going to get all of the major festival directors in the world coming here. That would be great if you did.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things. For me, it's not the most important thing. And so when I spent a year kind of getting my head around that as well, and so in 12, which was my first edition of the festival, we presented less work by Cork-based artists than we'd ever done before. And partly that was I was working on developing relationships and getting a sense of what was going on, and also because there was a platform called Solstice, which had run in 11 and again in 12, which in a way at that point was taking care of a lot of that, and was a kind of it was curated by somebody else but under the umbrella of the festival, and it was an opportunity for for me as a programmer to get to know those artists And, you know, if you look at the artists that were presented as part of We Live Here this year at the festival, 2 of the shows were created by artists who were involved in running Solstice. And 2 other shows were by artists whose work I saw for the first time at Solstice. And another piece was created by a community project which was initiated by the festival and which grew into an ensemble independent of the festival. So, you know, that there's something, when I spoke about sort of planting seeds, it's about sort of opening those, you know, spaces where you can discover and where people can experiment and make without being overexposed as well. You know, like if, and I've seen it happen at festivals that I go to and where, you know, a funding body comes up with a big grant and flies in a load of international presenters, and all they do is sit around the evening and go, oh my God, did you see that? It was awful. Just that it was awful. What are we doing here? Let's go for dinner. But that happens, you know, because people are seeing 300 or 400 shows a year. And on the one hand, it's okay for the work to develop in a kind of quiet way as well. And I think the thing about Edinburgh is you go to Edinburgh and you go dreaming about you're either going to get a fringe first and transfer to the West End or tour around the world, or all the actors are going to get picked up and they're going to get jobs in the National or on television. And if you go with comedy, you're going to win the Perrier Award and you'll be on television and it's going to be great. And of course, that doesn't happen, you know, and that's, there's a lot of mythology around Edinburgh and about, you know, those shows that were discovered in a basement, and there are those, you know, those shows that exist as well, but in a way to kind of, I suppose, to think about the festival less as a market and more as a kind of an ongoing laboratory, I think is kind of interesting. But then of course there are pressures from the market, because we're living in a late capitalist society where people you have to sell tickets, and you're judged on selling tickets, and no matter how good the event is, if it doesn't sell tickets, it's deemed a failure. From a certain point of view, like, people didn't go and see it, it can't be good, it can be important. But the idea to go, you know, it's okay for us not to be bringing in all of these festival directors and get this work shipped around the world, because it happens, and you know, and you know, I can think of a number of artists in the festival who have performed internationally in the last few weeks, and you know, I hope that will continue.
I must say, I thought Solstice was a great development, kind of annex to the festival, like a built-in fringe, and I was sort of sorry not that it wasn't there. I know it was there in a different guise, but it wasn't really there this year. Do you think it might reappear?
I mean, it was entirely an initiative of those 4 curators. You know, it came out of a number of arts development initiatives and curation development initiatives that the festival had run over the past couple of years. And this was before I arrived, but those 4 individuals were asked, how about you come together and do something? And they came up with this. And in a way, the second year, the reason it happened kind of was because it happened. Like, it had been great in the first year, so we have to do it again. And, you know, with doing something a second time, it's always harder. Like, it has to be a success. And and I know for those artists, you know, and because many of them were artists who were running it, they actually felt in part that they were putting a lot of effort into showing other people's work, and they needed space to make their own work. And I suppose I also thought that now there was an opportunity for us to work a little bit more closely with some of those companies, and obviously not to be able to work with all the people that we would have liked to, but to give a small amount of financial support, to give a little bit more profile, to present them, you know, as individual events in the festival program rather than as part of this thing. And, you know, we had conversations with Solstice curators about, could it grow into a fringe? We talked about the F word a lot. And I think, you know, I would be totally excited about something like that emerging again. And of course, you know, there is a pressure with a festival like this that everybody wants to be in the festival. When you look at something like, you know, I mean, the Edinburgh Fringe was originally 6 shows by local artists who were disgruntled because the National was coming up from, or the Royal Shakespeare Company was coming up from London to do something, and they weren't being involved, you know, and so they said, well, we're going to do it ourselves, and so, you know, that it came out of an authentic response to something, and then it grew into, obviously took over, you know, and or similarly, you know, something like the Dublin Fringe Festival, which was that the festival had become really bulky and flabby, and the back of the brochure was filled with other attractions. And at a certain point, Tony O'Dullig asked the director Jimmy Fay, would you ever take all those other attractions and make a Fringe Festival out of them? And now, of course, you know, for many people, the Fringe is a thing, and the festival isn't a thing. You know, so there's something about, you know, leaving those things grow and fade away as they do. You know, if something is, you know, I mean, I think it's a hugely exciting. I mean, McCannigan's here, and even to see that Lady Cork, you know, has emerged. I think is, you know, is a really exciting thing. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see what that happens and what the need is and what the response from the community is, and you know, and if something is worth doing, it continues, and if something needs to evolve into something else, then let it do that. I would think, you know, the last thing we want to be doing is, you know, like at a certain point, you know, people get involved in the arts because they actually want to, and then you find your time spending like, you know, 90% of your time doing things that you really don't want to do at all. And there's a tipping point, you know, where, you know, like you can, you know, because as I said, I never intended to become a festival director. And there have been points this year where I've been sitting at my desk and Excel has become my stage, and I've been moving characters around Excel and telling fictional stories to myself. And I kind of, you know, wish I was back in the rehearsal room. But then there's a moment where you sit in the audience and the lights go down, or the sun comes up, or whatever happens, and it's almost all worth it.
Thanks, Chris. You have a question?
Just
Can we make this the final one?
Maybe you kind of are giving the answer there already. So I'm curious with regard to your own personal development. You are obviously absolutely in love with the art form of theatre. So the way you relate to the art form, has that undergone changes over the years? And also the question I would be interested in, I mean, you have been to many places, different parts of the world. Is there a certain type of theatre, form of theatre which really speaks to you? Is there a theatre which you think these days, given our times here, is the theatre we should have here and we should engage with? Are there types of theatre you're distancing yourself from, others you embrace clearly? That's a very broad question.
So the second part of that question is there something that I think is what we should be doing? And then the first part is about my experience of the work. I mean, I alluded to this, like there are artists who I think are major artists now, and who I would travel to see their work. I'm thinking of somebody like Richard Maxwell or Romeo Castellucci. And the first time I saw that work, I had no idea how to even engage with it. I like Richard Maxwell, which I don't know if anyone knows the work. It's really wooden. He works with mostly amateur actors, and they just do the text like this. And often it's quite emotional things. It's like, you know, 5 people fighting and getting divorced and killing each other. But it's really deadpan and really American. And like the first time, I couldn't tell whether this was like on purpose or whether it was awful. And similarly, the first time I saw, you know, Castellucci, which is sort of like really visual, really intense work, which is like layers and layers and layers of code, I just sort of went, this is incredibly compelling, but I have no idea how to engage with this. This is not like anything I know. And so on the one hand, you become more. I spoke to some people who had seen a piece by Richard Maxwell for the first time in the Dublin Theatre Festival this year, which interestingly most of the young He's so hot right now in New York. He's been so hot right now in New York and in Berlin and everywhere for ages. And most of the emerging theatre community in Dublin loathed it. They thought it was dreadful. And I tried to say something without sounding really patronising, which was I didn't like wine the first time I drank it either. What's this? This is horrible. It's like, you know, okay, I'll have it, okay. You know, what do you see in it? You know, and I love wine. So, you know, on the one hand, you learn. It's like learning how to read, and so I think I suppose I've become probably better at reading the work. And you know, but still you try and I think I maybe more than some of my peers or colleagues, you know, who are maybe a little older than I am and slightly more jaded and slightly more cynical. But you do go in, you want it to be fantastic. And Phelan McDermott, who is the director of a company called Improbable in the UK, he did an opening for a showcase for the British Council in Edinburgh a few years ago. And he reminded a room of like 600 international presenters from around the world, it's your responsibility whether it's good or not. What you bring into the room is so much of whether this is going to be good or not. If you go in with a grumpy head, it's not going to be good. And if you go in with openness and generosity, you have a much better chance of it being good. So you go in and you want to fall in love. You know, it's like going on dates. And you every single time you want it to be the one. And then you find yourself back at home on the website, clicking through, trying to find something else to go on a date with. And so, you know, I suppose you try and approach it that way, but you also, you know, as a presenter, you have a responsibility to take the work in its broader context. How does it relate to other work that's being made right now? And to try and, you know, and again, this relates to my thing about the first time I saw Richard Maxwell. What's the artist trying to do, and how successfully are they doing it? Even if you don't like it. So, you know, I probably don't need to go and see another production of an Ibsen play in period costume with that panelled set, or a Chekhov play with those pine trees at the back and people being, you know, but you know, if it's done really well, there is something that can be electrifying about it. You know? So that's sort of part of that. But you try and be open all the time, you know, and to try and not judge the work. And so I think I'm probably more critical than most people, but also probably more generous than most people. Like I'll stick up for something when everyone else doesn't like it. Maybe that's out of contrariness, but it's also about going, you know, like you need to assume when you sit down to watch a piece of work that they're doing what they've decided to do, and they're doing it on purpose. And then you judge it in relation to the terms that they've set themselves. You know, so that you go, well, the lighting is really awful, and then you kind of go, well, this show has been presented all over the world, and I've read the review in the New York Times, so clearly the lighting's on purpose, or is there something I'm not seeing? This is awful. And then you go, well, actually, you know, if the lighting isn't slick, maybe that's trying to do something they're not trying to be. They're trying to do something, you know, so that actually these lights sort of fashion on and off, and that light that just fell off the thing. Actually, is that a decision? And how does that relate? And then, you know, and but that thing about assuming everything is on purpose is a useful thing. In terms of the kind of work that I think people should be making right now, I think it's broader than ever. As a young director, I think I was guilty, as many people are, and not guilty, you don't need to be guilty about it, of making work that was like other things. And it was like, I've seen this in Berlin, it was great. If I make shows like that, people will bring them to Berlin, it would be great. And then when I became a presenter, really quickly I realised that if I go and see a show that's like the Worcester Group, do you know the Worcester Group? An American opportunities experimental company, lots of copying things on video, and it's very distant. If I see a show and it's like the Worcester Group, I won't invite it, I'll invite the Worcester Group. You know? And I suppose it found, you know, as a way of reflecting on my own practice as a director, what is it about this work? What is the artist trying to communicate about the work and about the world? You know, and it's not that they need to completely reinvent the form of theatre every time, but there's a difference between going to see, you know, a production of Ibsen in period costume where they're flouncing around in period costume, and a production of Ibsen in period costume where they're flouncing around with real delicacy and grace, and you discover something about humanity in the work. So, you know, I mean, you know, I'm interested at the moment in music theatre. I'm more and more of the work I make as a director is in music theatre and new opera. And I think partly because it's a form that feels like it's finding its time again. In terms of that we're in a culture where we're used to being overstimulated and sticking on, you know, to sort of reading the news and watching YouTube of Beyonce and looking at cats and like doing your arts council application and going for a walk all at the same time. And the idea of these art forms which are kind of hybrid and that are not about making opera like how opera was, but about the best thing I've seen in the theatre this year was a production of an opera by Richard Strauss called Elektra, directed by the sadly late Patrice Chéreau, the French director who died a few weeks ago. I've been next to him for once, and I've never seen anything like it, and it was naturalism. And it was Greek tragedy as opera by Richard Strauss as naturalism. And the lead performer who was singing Elektra, I have never seen an actor give a performance like that. Like, it was like possession. It was like, the audience at the end, the house lights went down, and everyone went, because they hadn't breathed for 100 minutes, And that's a really old thing, directed in a really, in a way, traditional way, but that, but Chéreau was able to put humanity on the stage in a way that my life was richer every time I encountered it, But I'm interested in, as you can probably tell from the program that we do, I'm interested in work that puts real life on stage. I'm interested in that work that kind of looks at non-fiction on the stage and how you do that and how you work with performers who are not performers. As a director, I work mostly with fiction and with drama, and I probably present less drama than anything else in the festival. And that's interesting for me because I make work in an environment where people like me are conspiring to make it redundant. It's like, and that's interesting. So then when you're making drama, what is it about that experience of seeing Elektra by Patrice Chéreau, which you don't get watching Rimini Protocol or Richard Maxwell or Romeo Castellucci or a walk or a headphone piece or, it's sort of, what is it about that? And so then, so I look for that, and I look for, if someone is directing actors, what is that? What's happening? And actually, all I'm interested in is that there's something happening. That's all. And often there isn't anything happening. You go and see something, and there actually is nothing happening. There's loads happening, but there's nothing happening. And as long as there's something happening, I'm happy. And whether that's music or art or dance or a book, or if there's something happening, that's, And I think if you can approach the work in that way, even if you don't like it, like, I can say, I don't like it, but there's something happening. That's, that's great. And you sort of just try and, as a presenter, you try and work with those artists who are doing something which is for real, and that thing that's for real might be really artificial, or it might be really for real. But like when you come out of something and feel, yeah, that happened, something happened. Yeah, we were there, together or on our own or however we were. But that's sort of what I'm looking for, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you so much.